It's really great to be here today. My name is Howard Lutnick, and I'm the chairman and chief executive of Cantor Fitzgerald. So let me talk Bitcoin for a little bit. I want to be clear. I am a fan of Bitcoin. Of course, do I own Bitcoin? Of course I do. Cantor Fitzgerald and all of its partners are a fan of Bitcoin. Does Cantor Fitzgerald own Bitcoin? A shed load of Bitcoin. My view is Bitcoin, like gold, should be free to trade everywhere in the world. And as the largest wholesaler in the world, we are going to do everything in our power to make it so. Bitcoin is the same as gold, and Bitcoin should trade the same as gold everywhere in the world without exception and without limitation.
I'm long gold. I'm long Bitcoin. I probably have some basket of gold, Bitcoin, commodities, and NASDAQ, something like that. And I would own zero fixed income.
But on balance, I support Bitcoin, and I'm not an investor. The only publicly traded stock I own is Tesla. And the only significant thing I own outside of Tesla is my SpaceX stock that could help create both companies. So, but apart from that, I do own Bitcoin, and Tesla owns Bitcoin, SpaceX owns Bitcoin, and then I do personally own a bit of Ethereum and Dogecoin, of course. So, but on balance, I support.
Do you own crypto, any Bitcoin or Ethereum? Would you play around with this?
I do, yeah. I think it's reasonable to own it as a part of a diversified portfolio. And I'm not giving anybody investment advice, by the way.
When did you get interested in it?
I've been interested in it for a while, and I've been researching it and so forth. And so I think it's interesting.
A lot of people, I don't know if you've talked about this publicly before. Are people going to say that you're a Bitcoin bull?
I don't know what they're going to say. I don't want to put any labels on me. It's just that it's something that, from a personal point of view, I'm interested in.
I have hundreds of millions of dollars.
Okay.
Hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars exposure to Bitcoin. And it will be billions.
I was going to say, so next year when you come back and we'll do this again and you'll be a Bitcoin billionaire and
yeah, but you remember that model I told you. So if every time Bitcoin dips, I'm going to be the buyer. What you're going to see is Cantor Fitzgerald is going to be the sponsor of Bitcoin into traditional finance.
Mm-hmm.
And so we will be the leader of it. And I'll pull out this podcast in years to come and say, see, I told you, because no one's going to remember.
Of course.
Right. But all the banks, after we do it and show people how to do it right, they'll all copy.
Mm-hmm.
And so the asset of Bitcoin will just, as it becomes more accepted, it will become more valuable. And the whole Bitcoin nation should just call it a commodity, never a currency.
Mm-hmm.
Just call it a commodity. Because if it's a currency, you're attacking the politicians of the country,
mm-hmm.
right? You're trying to replace my currency with yours.
Mm-hmm.
But if you say, hey, I'm just oil, I'm just gold,
mm-hmm.
I'm just a commodity, leave me be, right? Then they'll leave you be. And that is true. And it will be why Bitcoin, which is rare and is special, will become ever more rare, as we both know,
mm-hmm.
ever more valuable over time. It'll be financed just like gold is, right? Gold is, it's not like super financeable, but it's financeable. Oil,
mm-hmm.
it's not super financeable,
mm-hmm.
but it's financeable, right? Bitcoin will be financeable. Bitcoin will be way, way, way higher, sometimes lower. You just have to have faith.
Interviewing one of the richest men on the planet, and we just arrived at his $100 million mansion here in Palm Beach, so he can tell me exactly how he got here. Thank you so much for having us at your house today. This is, without a doubt, the most beautiful house I've ever seen in my life.
Really?
Yes.
Thank you.
As of today, how much in assets is your company, Interactive Brokers, have under management?
roughly $350 billion.
Wow. You've come a long way, though. Let's go back to 1944, the year you were born.
1944, I was born in Budapest during the time when the city was under siege and it was being bombed. And I was born in the basement of the hospital because there was a bombing raid.
Those must be your neighbors flying in the helicopter.
Yeah, well, Trump doesn't like it when it flies over here.
Yeah.
He just lives down there. 3 houses down that way.
Yeah, just around the corner from Trump.
Right.
Not bad, yeah.
I think that anybody who does not have Bitcoin should have some Bitcoin, but not too much. I would recommend that people put maybe their 2 to 3% of their net worth into Bitcoin.
With Bitcoin at $100,000, what's your take on crypto? Are you reassessing?
My view on cryptos remain pretty much the same, and I'll articulate it. First of all, I think that, and I own crypto, I own some Bitcoin. The question is the amount and how attractive it is relative to gold, okay? I think that there's kind of the old man's gold and then younger man's crypto. But the important thing, first of all, is to represent whether one or the other, and really ideally some of both, should be in the portfolio. Don't be so fanatical that you're just having one and not the other. And do worry about the value of money and what is your alternative money that can't be printed. So, but if you look at that, it's an effective diversifier of the portfolio. So you actually reduce your risk by having some in the portfolio, somewhere between 10 and 15% of the portfolio.
Let's talk Bitcoin. 2012, I was introduced to it. I started to accumulate. 2013, I wrote an article. And
so hold on, just so we know and can feel bad about ourselves, you're accumulating it at what price?
Well, my dollar cost average is around 100 and something.
And you've held it, everything you've bought?
Well, at one point, myself and so I was introduced to it by a person. I asked him if I could disclose his name. He said no. But he, myself, and another person, all three of us relatively well known in the Valley, we started. At one point, we owned almost 5% of the entire float in 2013. We've sold, they've sold, et cetera, et cetera. I wish we had kept it all. We didn't. It's fine. But then I wrote an article, and I said, you know what? There's so much asymmetric upside here. This is a thing that either goes to, at the time I said, roughly the value of gold. And at the time, it was about $100 a coin. And so there's very little downside. There's all this asymmetric upside. I said, take 1% of your net worth and buy this schmuck insurance. This is a fantastic fundamental hedge and store of value against autocratic regimes and banking infrastructure that we know is corrosive to how the world needs to work properly. You cannot have central banks infinitely printing currency.
If you haven't jumped on this bus or train or whatever vehicle you want to describe it as, has it left the station?
No. So here's what I would say. The same way that I said in 2013, put 1% of your net worth into Bitcoin, I will put myself out there today. I think this thing is $100,000 a coin, probably in the next 3 to 4 years. And I think it is, in the next 20 years, $1 million a coin. So there you have it.
Basically just have Bitcoin, MicroStrategy, 4 or 5 miners, some oil companies, and some gold miners. That's it.
Amazing. Okay, so Ricardo is on the Bitcoin standard.
I want to share a little story because, I usually am introduced here as the 3rd richest man in Mexico. I'm on some billionaire list. Who cares? The point is, it was not always like this. I want to share a little bit about what happened to me and the family in the years and how we got here, and maybe you have some take-home value. So the guy in the middle is my grandfather. He was born in 1906. My dad was born in 1932. I was born in 55. What does it matter? It matters because we've been victims of the fiat fraud for the whole century. And here's my dad, a bit older now. He's 90 years old, still in good health. And he had taken out a loan of $9 million to grow the company. What happened was we had a huge devaluation, and the peso went from 24 to almost 3,000 to 1. Of course, our company went broke. We went to Chapter 11, and we had to get rid of a lot of people. I got to work there. But that's me, handsome young guy, eh? I was making $2,000 in 1980, and a few years later, I was making $20. The same salary was down from $2,000 to $20. So I know about hyperinflation. I've been there. And it's not the same to know it in theory as to actually be a victim of it. Is this the future you want? You are here, $2,000. You're going there, $20 a month of salary. For older people, people who are looking forward to living from their savings and from their pension money, they're going to be wiped out. Also, the poorest people, the people who don't have assets, don't have home, don't have cars, don't have stocks, they'll just have the money in the pocket. They're going to be wiped out.
No es así. Nomás está buscando dónde guardar un poquito de dinero que no se lo robe el gobierno, ¿no? Entonces, para eso debería comprar unos bitcoins, cada mes comprar unos poquitos sats, and stack them, and that's it. Ahora, si te fijas, nada más son 21 million bitcoins para todo el planeta, ¿no? O sea, mucha gente ha sacado este cálculo antes que yo, ¿no? Evidentemente es un bien muy escaso y they're not making any more, ¿no? Entonces, no tiene más que subir.
Twins had majored in economics at Harvard and could quickly see Bitcoin had potential not just as a currency, but as a store of value, essentially digital gold. Now, the reason gold has been used as currency for so much of history is because it's extremely durable, portable, hard to counterfeit, easy to authenticate, and it's scarce enough to be valuable, but not too rare that they'd quickly run out of it. The Winklevoss twins realized Bitcoin not only had those same properties as gold, but in many ways, it was much better. Like, it could easily be divided into small fractions and was more easily transferred. Firstly, the twins decided to become investors in Charlie Shrem's Bitcoin exchange company, BitInstance. They reportedly put around $1.5 million in to become part owners of the company. But that was just the start of the Winklevoss plans. They also asked Charlie to buy them $100,000 worth of Bitcoin for themselves. Back then, Charlie was used to dealing in orders of a few $100s, so this was huge. And then a few days later, the twins asked him to buy another $100,000 worth of Bitcoin for them, and the orders just kept coming. Before long, the Winklevoss had bought around 1% of all Bitcoin, roughly 200,000 coins, back when the price of Bitcoin was below $10 per coin.
You guys were some of the earliest investors in Bitcoin. Why have you guys held on this entire time? There's been volatility, all this stuff. Like, what has kept you guys so convicted since the very early days until today?
So we still think it's really early. We think Bitcoin's gold 2.0. It will disrupt gold, so its market cap has to be 10 trillion or more, because that's the market cap of gold. So Bitcoin's hovering around 1 trillion now. We still think it's at least conservatively a 10x from here. So even at 35,000, it feels like a really good buying opportunity long term, because we think at a $10 trillion market cap, we think one Bitcoin will be worth $500,000. And we think that could happen inside this decade, definitely the next 5 years. So we're hodlers at least until $500,000. And then at that point, you won't even have to sell because you can borrow off it or whatever.
Right.
Bitcoin already surging in price as we enter 2018, and one of the biggest names in Silicon Valley might be behind it. Venture capitalist Peter Thiel just made a giant bet on the volatile cryptocurrency. Our very own Hillary Vaughn has more details. Hillary?
Hey, Dagan. Well, the Wall Street Journal reports that Peter Thiel's venture capital firm, Founders Fund, bought about $15 million worth of Bitcoin currency several months ago. And they say that Thiel told investors that that investment is now worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But it's worth even more today because Bitcoin jumped 11% on the news that one of Silicon Valley's elite is putting his money where his mouth is. Thiel in October told Fox Business's Maria Bartiromo last fall that he thinks the cryptocurrency is a safe bet.
If Bitcoin ends up being the cyber equivalent of gold, you know, it has a great potential left. So it's a very different kind of thing from what people in Silicon Valley normally focus on. Companies, not algorithms or protocols, but this may be one exception that's very underestimated.
Woke companies are sort of quasi-controlled by the government in a way that Bitcoin never will be, and in that sort of a world, I would submit that perhaps the way we should think of the Bitcoin to equity ratio, the benchmark for Bitcoin is not gold, but equities. And the question is, why can't there be parity between Bitcoin and equities? Why shouldn't we be talking about something more like 100 to 1? Which, of course, won't be as good as it sounds because the fiat money will be worth a lot less and it'll be taxed pretty heavily and whatnot. But I think, I'm still hopeful that if Bitcoin goes up by a factor of 100, you'll make some money, a modest amount of money, in real terms.
Equity money along the way, but you didn't. Why didn't you?
Well, that's true. As of now, Tilgram was 100% owned by myself, which is, like I said, quite unusual.
Well, I've never heard of that before.
The reason I tried to, stay away from venture capital money, at least at the early stages of our development, is because we wanted to be independent. And also, for me, it was never about money, right? So I have a few $100 million in my bank account or in Bitcoin since 10 years ago.
Equity money.
Headlines were, we know Steve Wozniak as the co-founder of Apple, the man who brought Comic-Con to Silicon Valley, and a high-tech genius and experimenter. I'm a technologist, and I like to buy the latest technology, the latest apps. Which eventually led Wozniak to Bitcoin, the red-hot virtual currency that, when Woz bought in, was cheap. Some years went by, and all of a sudden it was these huge prices, $2,000, $4,000 a Bitcoin.
You've said in the past that you believe that Bitcoin is going to be the world's single currency, or you hope that it is going to be the world's single currency. We've seen massive value destruction in Bitcoin. Are you still a believer in that? Is that still a workable model for you?
I'm not sure I can buy that we've seen massive value destruction. I think we've seen massive value creation. There was, I think, a period of time, psychology will often drive like stock market dips in that. Oh my gosh, got to get out now, got to get out now. The psychology factor is kind of a fear thing. And there was this idea that, my gosh, Bitcoin might go up to $40,000 and went up to $20,000. I had a lot of Bitcoin. And two times it's gone way up and made money. And just recently, I think Bitcoin is going to go to 100,000. I just, I don't know where you get that feeling. I can't put any mathematics to it. I just really feel it from all of the interest. Mm-hmm. The interest in crypto is so high. And so I put a bunch of money into an online wallet account, Coinbase, and pretty much it's sitting right where it was right now. Went way up, it doubled, and then it halved again. Bitcoin is limited to how many Bitcoin can ever be produced, unlike real currency, which governments can just create as much more of as they ever want to.
So I've evolved on this.
Okay.
If you've done your homework, about 5 or 6 years ago, I said more than once, crypto and Bitcoin are a solution in search of a problem.
Right.
So what the hell are these people all looking for? We already have that. It's called the dollar.
Right.
Okay. So for the first move in Bitcoin, I think it went from, $50 to 17,000. I just sat there aghast. And by the way, consistent with our earlier conversation, I wanted to buy it every day it was going up, even though I didn't think much of it. I just couldn't stand the fact that it was going up, and I didn't own it. So fast forward, I never owned it from like $50 to 17,000. Felt like a moron. Then it goes back down to 3,000 again. And then a couple things happen. And this is consistent with the fundamental and then what makes something go up or down. So solution in search of a problem. I found the problem when we did the CARES Act and Chairman Powell started crossing all sorts of red lines in terms of what the Fed would do and wouldn't do. The problem was Jay Powell and the world central bankers going nuts and making fiat money even more questionable than it had already been when I used to own gold. Then the second thing that happened is I got a call from Paul Jones. And he says to me, do you know that when Bitcoin went from 17,000 to 3,000, 86% of the people that owned it at 17,000 never sold it? Well, this was huge in my mind.
Right.
Here's something with a finite supply. 86% of the owners are religious zealots. I mean, who the hell holds something through 17,000 to 3,000? And it turns out none of them, 86% of the people never sold it. And I had this new central bank craziness phenomena. The other thing that happened, it had been, it had a few more years under its belt. So it goes up to 6,000 in the middle of the last spring. And I go, well, I got to buy some of this just because these kids on the West Coast that are already worth more than I am, and they're going to be making a lot more money than me in the future. For some reason, they're looking at this thing the way I've always looked at gold, which is a store of value if I don't trust fiat currencies. And then the thing that Paul told me, and then the fact that it had been around 13 years, it had become a brand.
Right.
So it's funny, I tried to buy 100 million at 6,200. It took me 2 weeks to buy 20 million. I bought it all around 6,500, I think. And I said, this is ridiculous. It takes me 2 weeks. I can buy that much gold in 2 seconds. So like an idiot, I stopped buying it. Next thing I knew, the thing's trading at 36,000. I took my costs and then some out of it. And I still own some of it. I'm a 68-year-old dinosaur, but once it started moving and these institutions started adopting it, I could see the old elephant trying to get through the keyhole, and they can't fit through in time. I own this company called Palantir, and I see they announced with their earnings today they're going to start accepting Bitcoin, and they may invest it. That's happening all over the place. And this thing is never going to have more than 21 million. It's a fixed supply. So I think because it's a brand, it's been around for 14 years, because of the finite supply, it has sort of won the store of value game. Is it going to beat gold? I don't know. It's sure as hell doing a good imitation of it the last year or two.
The head of the world's largest asset manager told CNBC's Squawk on the Street this morning that he sees a future for Bitcoin after previously being a proud skeptic of the cryptocurrency.
I studied it, learned about it, and I came away saying, okay, my opinion 5 years ago was wrong. Here's my opinion today. This is what I believe in today. I believe the opportunity today. I believe Bitcoin is legitimate. I'm not trying to say there's not misuses like everything else, but it is a legitimate financial instrument that allows you to have maybe uncorrelated, non-correlated type of returns. I believe it is an instrument that you invest in when you're more frightened, though. It is an instrument when you believe that countries are debasing their currency, debasing their currency by excess deficits, and some countries are. I believe we have countries where you're frightened of your everyday existence, and if you have an opportunity to invest in something that is outside your country's control, then you can have more financial control. And so I'm a major believer that there is a role for Bitcoin in portfolio.
Bitcoin is by far the leading cryptocurrency, and you think will remain that for a while?
I do. I think the most important thing that happened this year in Bitcoin is Larry Fink. He got orange pilled, as we say.
Orange pill is when you take a non-believer and you make him a believer in Bitcoin. And Larry was a non-believer, and now he says, hey, this is going to be a global currency. People around the world all trust it.
Well,
BlackRock is the biggest asset
BlackRock is now doing an ETF, or trying to do an ETF for Bitcoin.
Yes.
Is that a big change in the industry?
Yes. Who's the CEO of this iconic company to say, I believe in this, right? That's kind of huge, because again, like when Elizabeth Warren says, well, I don't believe in Bitcoin, I'm like, well, Elizabeth, Larry Fink does, Stan Druckenmiller does, Jeff Yost does, the richest person in your state, Abby Johnson does.
I'm very bullish on the long-term viability of Bitcoin.
It's your ETF
Yes.
over at iShares.
Yes.
It's about to overtake Grayscale.
Yes.
Have you ever seen this much inflow this quickly into
iBit is the fastest growing ETF in the history of ETFs.
How much Bitcoin do you now own? Because we know that you bought 30,000 Bitcoin seized from the Silk Road in 2014. Forbes says your net worth is 2.9 billion. I don't know. I'm sure you've spent some of that Bitcoin on investments, but I mean, 30,000 Bitcoin is worth about 3 billion today. Are you okay with clarifying or disclosing how much Bitcoin you own? And is Forbes right about your net worth?
I just keep buying more.
How much Bitcoin do you now own?
On Wealth Track, why investment legend Bill Miller has gone really big on Bitcoin.
I think the average investor should ask himself or herself, what do you have in your portfolio that has this kind of track record, number one, is very, very underpenetrated, can provide a service of insurance against financial catastrophe that no one else can provide, and can go up 10 times or 50 times? The answer is nothing.
Why Bill Miller has gone big on Bitcoin is on Consuelo Mack Wealth Track. Hello and welcome to this edition of Wealth Track. I'm Consuelo Mack. This week is part 2 of our interview with legendary value investor Bill Miller. As longtime Wealth Track viewers know, Miller has been a guest of ours since our launch in 2005 and doesn't do many TV interviews. As he told me recently, time is his scarcest resource, so we are delighted that he is with us again this week. Miller is the founder, owner, and chief investment officer of Miller Value Partners, a firm he founded in 1999 while working at Legg Mason, but took over completely in 2017. As most of you know, Miller holds the unbeaten record of beating the S&P 500 for 15 consecutive years from 1991 to 2005 with the Legg Mason Capital Management Value Trust Fund. His flagship, Miller Opportunity Trust Fund, which he created in 1999 and has co-managed with Samantha McLemore since 2014, has $2.4 billion in assets and has had many market-beating years interspersed with some sizable declines. But today's conversation is not about Miller Opportunity Trust, it's about his personal portfolio. And here's the headline: half of Miller's personal net worth is in Bitcoin and a few other cryptocurrency investments, and it's leveraged. I asked Miller why he has gone so big on Bitcoin in his personal account.
I'd say it's a combination of things, as it would have to be to allow something to get that big a part of your portfolio, because it goes against many of the tenets of financial discipline. On the other hand, the people that actually are the richest people in the country all are massively concentrated. Buffett and Berkshire, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg. So they're not widely diversified. They're highly concentrated. And I think that's because they have a high degree of confidence, or have had a high degree of confidence in the value of those investments. But my thinking here was that I heard a talk on Bitcoin given by the person who's known as Patient Zero in the Bitcoin world, Wences Casares. And Wences gave a talk at the Allen & Company's Sun Valley Conference, and he led off his talk, this is 2014, I want to say. He led off his talk by saying that, asking how anybody owned Bitcoin. No, nobody in the audience owned it, except for him. And did anybody know what it was? And a few scattered hands went up. And he said, well, let me explain to you why I own Bitcoin. And he said, and it's because I understand why you wouldn't understand it, because you all live in America, and you have a rule of law, and you have orderly governments, and in most times you have relatively low inflation and a prosperous economy. And he said, but I'm from Argentina, and my family's been there 150 years, and we've been wiped out 4 separate times by the Argentinian government, seizing our assets, nationalizing the banks, inflating us out with hyperinflation. And he said, so Bitcoin can't be touched by the government. It's a peer-to-peer, decentralized, independent network. It's a ledger that records every transaction that's public. It's immutable. And he said, so the government, if you have Bitcoin, the government cannot take it away from you. And he said, so think of it as an insurance policy. And he went into it and talked about it. And I thought, and he talked about putting 1% of your liquid net worth in Bitcoin. And I thought that was sensible. He laid out what it could do if it worked. He said then that it was very risky, because then it was about $200. But I bought some then, and I bought a little bit more over time, and it became $500. And then I stopped buying it. And I didn't buy it for years until just the spring of this year. It hit a $66,000 high price. And then in 4 weeks, it was in half. Now, Bitcoin has gone up on average 170% a year for the last 11 years. Now, but that's not every year, it's just an average. It's gone down 3 different times by more than 80%. So that is, a very volatile and therefore very dangerous, especially if you're levered, as you can be if you're on some of these exchanges that'll loan you 50 to 1 on your Bitcoin. But each time it's been stopped at around the low 80s level, and it's come back. And this time I started buying it again at $30,000, down from 66. And my reasoning was, there's a lot more people using it now. There's a lot more money going into it in the venture capital world. There are a lot of people who are skeptics who are now at least trying it out. And I thought maybe 50% is a good stopping point for it. But if it goes back down to 80 or 85, I'll buy it all the way down. Well, it did stop right around 50% and slowly started its way back up again. But I bought a fair amount at the $30,000 range, and have been adding to various Bitcoin-related investments since then.
I mean, number one, you don't live in Argentina. You do live in a country, with a rule of law, and I'm not sure the dollar is really a stable currency, but it certainly just holds its value. Somebody else could, create another Bitcoin. It's not governed by any rule of law. So, why such confidence in it as an investment, aside from the fact that it certainly has worked really well and more people are kind of jumping on the bandwagon?
There's several different ways to approach that.
Yeah.
I would say that right now it's best thought of as digital gold. So gold is, as people have said, a store of value for 5,000 years.
Right.
And gold is what people typically fled to when the governments tried to inflate them out. And in the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt confiscated everybody's gold in 1933. You had to turn it in or you went to jail. So they can't confiscate your Bitcoin because there's nothing, you hold it securely. As long as you have an internet connection, you can send it somewhere instantaneously at very low cost. And the reason I like the insurance company analogy is because if you think about, people talk about the intrinsic value of Bitcoin. This is a Warren Buffett argument, that Bitcoin has no intrinsic value. It doesn't have any earnings. It'll never pay any dividends. And so how do you even think about something like that? It is a new technology. It's something that couldn't be done before. But in any case, the answer that I have to that is, well, I mean, what's the intrinsic value of that Mickey Mantle baseball card that sold for $5.5 million? It's just cardboard, and it doesn't even have a legend. It could be counterfeited very easily. Or what's the intrinsic value of a Picasso painting, which is just canvas and paint, and maybe a frame, but people will pay millions or tens of millions of dollars for it. And so it comes down at the very basic level for supply and demand. So Bitcoin is the only economic entity where the supply is unaffected by the demand. So even with gold, if gold, which is $1,800 today, if gold goes to $18,000, there will be a lot more gold mined because mines that are unprofitable will become profitable. And so gold, which accretes today, the production of gold is equal to about 1.5% to 2% of the total value per year. That's the same accretion that Bitcoin has currently. But this year, 2022, I think will drop below 1.5% on that. So only 21 million Bitcoin can ever be created or close to it. It doesn't matter if Bitcoin is 100,000 or 20 million, there's only going to be that many of them. So all you have to really believe is that the demand for Bitcoin will grow faster than 1.5%, over the next number of years, and the price inexorably will go up. So I've only recently been allowing myself to be described as a Bitcoin bull. I used to tell people, they say, "Oh, you're a Bitcoin bull. You own a lot of Bitcoin." I'm like, I do own a lot of it, but I'm actually a Bitcoin observer, and I'm observing its trajectory as a new technology and comparing it to the trajectories of things like the printing press, or the steam engine, or the railroads, or the automobile, or electricity, and it's following that very not predictable, because it's not predictable certainly in the early days, a well understood path for the adoption of new technologies. And I think it was Stan Druckenmiller said earlier in the year that, and now he owns Bitcoin, by the way, but he said that Bitcoin was a solution in search of a problem. And what I've found amusing about that is every new technology is a solution in search of a problem. Because you have a new technology, then you try and figure out what you're going to do with it. And so, when we created the internet, what are we going to do with that? So the Defense Department had good uses for it, but it was tough for other people to see. But now everybody can see what the value of the internet is. Same thing with the internal combustion engine, which was very dangerous and all, but now that's taken over the world, and now we're going to move to electricity. So all kinds of technologies have to grow into their potential. And Bitcoin is, I guess if you want the theoretical answer to the question, is that's the work of Brian Arthur, Santa Fe Institute, and Stanford, who is kind of the leading authority on what he calls increasing returns economics and what he calls lock-in and path dependence in the economy. So his basic idea is that when technologies reach a certain dominance and they're the leader, it's almost impossible to dislodge them, even without a very superior technology.
And Bitcoin's there? Is that what?
That's what I would say I and the other bulls believe.
Okay. But why the outsized, why 50% of your personal net worth? I mean, I'm assuming that the other 50% is in like Miller value funds, or I don't know how you've diversified. And
well, actually, close to the other 50% is in Amazon. All of the rest of the investments that I have are basically there to support margin debt, because I'm typically always on margin, which means I can take a lot of volatility. Now, I'm not obviously on deadly margin. I'm on using regular Reg T margin, and I've got a fair amount of margin capacity. But the rest of all the stocks could eliminate all the margin debt and have a fair amount left over, and then I'd have those. If I had to sell all those to pay off the debt, then still have Bitcoin and Amazon.
Bill, can you explain to me the concept of Bitcoin as an insurance policy?
There's 21 million shares of this insurance company outstanding, and every day that somebody wakes up and says, I need some insurance in case something, in case the government seizes all the gold like they did back in 1933. Or, when Afghanistan, we pulled out of Afghanistan, Western Union stopped remittances. So if you couldn't get money, and it's still hard to get money in Afghanistan, you were in serious trouble. In Lebanon, the lira has completely collapsed. Venezuela is a failed state. And yet Bitcoin continues right along. That was your insurance policy against financial catastrophe of one sort or another. And what did the Fed do when the pandemic shut down all parts of, or threatened to shut down all parts of the economy? The financial markets came unglued, and the normal relationships between cash and bonds and securities, especially asset-backed securities, got blown apart. And the Fed had to increase the money supply by 25% to keep those things from collapsing as they did in 2008.
Right.
During that time, the Bitcoin network functioned perfectly. There was no run on it. There was, prices went down initially until people figured out, wait a minute, we've had a tremendous collapse here, and the Bitcoin blockchain is functioning without any interference at all. So I think that explains it, I think, in a way that many people can understand. If you want a little bit of financial insurance, then buy a Bitcoin or a part of a Bitcoin. The argument I get most often is, why not gold?
Right, which is considered to be an insurance policy against catastrophe historically.
So the answer to that is, in my opinion anyway, gold has gone from been around 5,000 years, so it's gone from, make up a number and say a dime, a nickel in today's parlance. And in 5,000 years, it's gone from a nickel to $1,850. And in 10 years, Bitcoin has gone from a nickel to $57,000. So why would I own gold? Especially since gold in the last 10 years has gone down. In the last 10 years, Bitcoin is the best performing asset category in the world.
So you recently marked 40 years in the investment business.